I caught her cheating while she was still wearing her wedding dress. That's not a metaphor. I mean it literally. The lace was still perfect, her hair still pinned up, makeup flawless. And there she was, legs wrapped around another man in the guest house behind the venue. Less than 4 hours after we said our vows. I stood there in the doorway, frozen, my hand still on the doorknob. It felt like I was looking at something out of a bad movie. The kind you yell at the screen for being too unrealistic. Except this was real. This was my life. Her name is Kelsey. And just a few hours before, I thought she was the love of my life. We had just gotten married in my parents' backyard. Nothing too extravagant. String lights, soft music, those rustic wooden chairs everyone rents now. We kept it simple, but meaningful. I still remember the way she looked at me when she walked down the aisle. Her eyes were glassy, and for a moment I truly believed we were stepping into something sacred. I remember her vows. She said I was her calm in the storm, that I made her feel safe for the first time in her life. What a joke. After the ceremony, we did the whole reception thing. First dance, speeches, cake cutting. Everyone kept saying how perfect we looked together. And I believed it. God help me, I believed it. Then sometime around 4 p.m., I was talking with my cousin and a few friends from college when someone asked, "Where's Kelsey?" I didn't think anything of it. Figured she was freshening up, maybe changing shoes or talking with her bridesmaids. But 10-15 minutes went by and no one had seen her. That's when I noticed Brad was missing too. Brad, her old college friend who flew in from California. The guy I'd never met until 2 days before the wedding. The guy who, looking back, never stopped hovering around her the entire weekend. I thought I was being paranoid. I told myself I was overthinking. I wasn't. I found them in the guest house behind my parents' home. The one we'd used earlier for makeup and prep. I opened the door and you already know what I saw. Her. Him. My wife. My brand new wife. Our names weren't even dry on the marriage license. She screamed. He stood up like a guilty dog. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stared at her. And all I remember is this. She didn't look shocked. She looked annoyed, as if I had ruined something special. I didn't yell. I didn't hit anything. I just closed the door. Walked out. Slowly. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I remember passing by my uncle who was smoking a cigar under one of the patio umbrellas. He said, "You all right, bud?" And I think I nodded. Or maybe I didn't. I don't remember. I sat in the back seat of my own car for a while. No music. No AC. Just silence and my heart thumping like it was trying to break out of my chest. I couldn't breathe right. I kept seeing her. Her dress. Her hands on him. The same hands that had just clutched mine at the altar. People say heartbreak feels like a crack in your chest. Nah. It felt like my entire ribcage collapsed. I didn't go back to the reception. I left. Drove around for hours. I think I stopped at a gas station and bought a Gatorade I didn't even drink. I slept in the car that night, parked behind a strip mall. My phone was blowing up. Missed calls from friends, my mom, my best man. Texts from Kelsey. I didn't read any of them. I couldn't. Next morning, I finally went home. To our apartment. I opened the front door, and her bouquet was on the counter. The one she held walking down the aisle. I picked it up and threw it in the trash. I wanted to scream, cry, smash something, but nothing came out. That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation. Everyone we knew had been there. They'd clapped, cheered, cried with us. And now I had to figure out how to explain to them that my wife cheated on me before the cake even finished digesting in our guests' stomachs. Kelsey came home later that day. She walked in like she was bracing for a slap. She had changed out of her wedding dress, hair pulled back in a ponytail. Wearing sweatpants like this was just a normal Sunday. She said, "Can we talk?" I didn't even look at her. I just said, "You have 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, she managed to lie, cry, deflect, and somehow blame me. It was a mistake. I panicked. Brad was just there. "You were so busy with your friends." I didn't feel seen. Didn't feel seen. She actually said that. I asked her point blank, "Was this the first time?" She didn't answer right away. That told me everything. Eventually she said, "No." But it didn't mean anything. "I didn't think you'd find out." I laughed. "It came out sharp and ugly. That's what matters to you? Whether I found out." I told her to pack a bag. I couldn't even look at her. She stayed with her friend Stephanie for a few days. Meanwhile, I started digging, because something wasn't adding up. And I was about to find out this rabbit hole went deeper than just one guy in one night. It's a strange thing, how you can look back at something and suddenly realize all the signs were there. That's what happened when I started thinking about the night before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner. Brad had shown up late, wore jeans and a blazer like he was trying too hard to seem effortless. He kept making jokes that weren't funny, talking too loudly, pulling Kelsey aside to catch up. I remember him hugging her for too long. At the time, I thought it was just an awkward guy from her past trying to fit in. But now, it looked a whole lot different. After she moved out, or rather, after I kicked her out, I started going back through our photos. Not just from the wedding, from the last 6 months. Vegas trip with her coworkers. A wine tasting in Temecula. That beach day where I got food poisoning and left early, she stayed behind with the girls. Brad was in the background of more of those pictures than I remembered. And in the ones he wasn't in, he was still there, in comments, in likes, in tagged stories. I called my best man, Jordan. We've been friends since middle school. He was quiet at first. Then he said, "You sure you want to know?" My stomach dropped. That's when he told me. Apparently, during the rehearsal dinner, he went out back for a smoke and caught Kelsey and Brad whispering in the shadows behind the fence line. He thought it was weird, but he figured maybe she was having pre-wedding jitters and Brad was just being a friend. But what really hit me was this. Jordan said she touched Brad's chest, slid her hand across it slowly, like they were the ones about to get married. He didn't want to ruin my night, or my wedding, so he said nothing. I couldn't even be mad at him. Not really. If I'd seen that before the wedding, I might have convinced myself it was innocent. I might have married her anyway, just in denial. I started checking our shared iCloud album. Old photos, deleted ones, anything. That's when I found them, buried in a folder labeled Events. Screenshots of messages. Flirty ones. Some with suggestive emojis. Dates. Times. Brad wasn't the only one. There was another guy from work, Nate, and someone labeled just as MC with hotel reservations in Vegas and a photo of her in a hotel robe that I know I didn't take. I sat there, alone in that apartment, and realized I didn't know who I had just married. This wasn't a mistake. This was a lifestyle. And now I had a decision to make. Do I just get an annulment quietly and disappear from her mess? Or do I take this to court? Because suddenly, it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about principle, about being used, lied to, humiliated in front of everyone I love. And I wasn't going to go down quietly. The first time I considered taking her to court, I felt petty. I mean, what do you even sue someone for? Breaking your heart? Ruining your wedding day? But then I remembered. We had signed a prenup. Kelsey was the one who pushed for it, ironically. Her family had money, old money. Not crazy rich, but enough to want to protect her assets. At the time, I didn't care. I had nothing to hide. No trust fund. No family estate. I signed without hesitation. But buried in the clauses, somewhere between the typical legal jargon about assets and debt responsibilities, was a fidelity clause. I hadn't thought about it in over a year. But suddenly, that clause became a lifeline. I booked a meeting with a local divorce attorney. Her name was Melanie. Calm, sharp, no nonsense. She looked over the prenup in silence for about 5 minutes and then said, "You have a case." I asked her what kind. A strong one. She explained that in certain states, ours included, a marriage that starts under fraud or deception can be annulled, or even contested in civil court for damages if there's a prenuptial violation. That clause Kelsey had insisted on, meant to protect her, could now be used against her, especially with what I had. Timestamp texts. A witness, Jordan. Proof of infidelity on the day of the wedding. Evidence of multiple partners before the wedding. It was damning. Still, Melanie asked me to think carefully. "This won't be quick," she said, "and it won't be quiet. If you want peace, there are simpler ways." But I wasn't looking for peace anymore. I was looking for the truth to be on paper. Legal. Recognized. I wanted this betrayal to follow her the way it followed me. That weekend, I drafted a message to my family and close friends. I told them the truth, no sugarcoating. I explained why I disappeared from the wedding, what I'd walked in on, and what I planned to do next. Most were shocked. Some were silent. A few, like my sister and Jordan, offered to testify if it came to that. Kelsey, on the other hand, started panicking the moment she got the letter from my attorney. She texted me constantly, called, left voicemails crying. One message even said, "You're trying to ruin me." No, Kelsey, you ruined yourself. The letter changed everything. Once the court served her notice, it wasn't just between us anymore. Her parents found out, friends, co-workers, it spread fast. Weddings don't just end in silence, especially not ones that implode within 24 hours. People talk, and in this case, people wanted to talk. Stephanie, Kelsey's longtime friend, the one she'd stayed with after I kicked her out, messaged me. She said, "I don't want to get involved, but you deserve to know this wasn't the first time." I called her. What she told me made my stomach twist. Turns out, Brad had been around for longer than I thought. She confessed that Kelsey had been on and off with him since college, even during serious relationships. He was, in her words, a weakness. But it wasn't just him. There was someone from her old job, a bartender in Austin, a neighbor she used to go on runs with when we lived in our last apartment. It had never stopped. Not really. Even during our engagement, Stephanie apologized, said she hadn't realized the full extent, but I didn't need her apology. I needed her testimony. Melanie, my attorney, was building a case now, and Stephanie agreed to speak under oath if needed. Then came the bombshell. A week before our first court hearing, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside, printed screenshots, photos, messages, emails, all from different men, different dates, going back almost 2 years. No note, just evidence. Part of me thinks someone from her inner circle had had enough and wanted to come clean anonymously. I showed it all to Melanie. She nodded slowly, flipping through the pages. "This isn't just a divorce anymore," she said. "This is character destruction. This paints a pattern of deception, chronic, repetitive. And with this much evidence, a judge won't just rule on annulment. You could sue for fraud, emotional distress, financial damages." Kelsey's family finally reached out. Her dad called me. He was calm, but you could hear the shame in his voice. "I didn't raise her like this," he said. "I didn't know what to say." What do you say to a father who just realized his daughter is not who he thought she was? He asked me, begged me, not to go to trial, said he'd pay whatever needed to be paid. Quiet settlements, apologies, therapy. I could even keep the engagement gifts. But it was too late for that. She had stood in front of 100 people and told me I was her forever, and 4 hours later, she threw that away like it meant nothing. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about showing the truth in daylight. So I told her father exactly what I was going to do. I'll see her in court. Courtrooms aren't like the movies. They're quiet, stale, clinical. Fluorescent lights hum above you while people shuffle papers and speak in controlled tones. But despite all that, the tension is thick, especially when your ex-wife walks in wearing a white blouse like she's trying to look innocent again. Kelsey didn't make eye contact with me as she entered. Her lawyer was young, probably mid-30s, clearly polished and coached. He walked with confidence like they thought this was going to be a minor bump in the road. Like this was some misunderstanding that could be cleaned up with charm. My attorney, Melanie, came in cool and focused. She had her folders, tabs, and evidence sorted like she'd been waiting for this moment. The judge was a woman in her 50s, firm and no-nonsense. When she asked us both if we were willing to settle privately, Melanie spoke first. "No, Your Honor. We are pursuing a full annulment with supplemental civil damages based on repeated, documented marital fraud." Kelsey's lawyer tried to smile. "We'd argue this was a deeply emotional mistake, not legal fraud. The marriage was entered into in good faith." That's when Melanie handed over the folder. Dozens of printed screenshots, dates, messages, GPS data from Kelsey's phone on the night of the wedding. A printed copy of the prenup, with the fidelity clause highlighted in bright yellow. The judge's eyes scanned it all. She asked a single question. "Ms. Green, is this evidence disputed?" Kelsey swallowed hard and shook her head. And just like that, the door to denial slammed shut. We didn't even need to get into the full witness list yet. The judge scheduled a formal trial date 3 weeks out. But even during that preliminary hearing, Damage was already being done. Kelsey tried the waterworks. In the hallway after the session, she looked at me, finally, like I was a person again. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her eyes already glistening. And for the first time since that awful day, I didn't feel sad. I felt clear. I said, "You didn't just hurt me. You lied to everyone. And now, you're going to answer for it." Back at my place, I started going through our shared finances, following Melanie's advice. Turns out, she'd been using part of the wedding fund, money my parents contributed to, on getaways that I had never even heard about. One of the flights had been for Brad. His ticket was bought with my money. That became a new piece of evidence. Fraudulent spending. Use of shared assets under false pretenses. Melanie called it civil ammunition. And when we walked back into that courtroom 3 weeks later for the real battle, I came not just as a man who'd been cheated on, but as a plaintiff ready to win. Courtrooms may be quiet, but they're brutal. They peel people open. The first day of the trial started with opening statements. Melanie was calm but devastating. She laid it out clearly. Kelsey had entered the marriage under false pretenses, violated a signed legal agreement, and committed multiple acts of deception on the day of the wedding and in the weeks before. And there was proof. Then came Kelsey's lawyer. He leaned hard into emotion, called her conflicted, vulnerable, emotionally unstable due to past trauma, said what happened was a lapse in judgment, not a betrayal. He even tried to imply I was cold and controlling. That's when Melanie brought out the receipts. Literally, she presented transaction records, hotel rooms, plane tickets, gifts charged to joint credit cards. The room got quiet as they read out a transaction that paid for a weekend in Palm Springs for Kelsey Green and guest. That guest, we later proved, was Brad. Then came the witnesses. First up, Jordan, my best man. He was solid, spoke clearly, truthfully, said what he saw at the rehearsal dinner, the private conversation, the touch on Brad's chest, the way she pulled him aside like they were more than old friends. He admitted he hadn't told me because he didn't want to ruin the wedding, but the guilt had eaten at him since. Next was Stephanie, Kelsey's friend, the one she'd stayed with after I kicked her out. Her testimony hit hard. She described years of infidelity, different men, Brad being just the one she kept going back to. She didn't look angry or bitter. She looked tired, like someone who had been covering for a friend for too long and finally had enough. Then something unexpected happened. A guy I didn't recognize was called to the stand. Melanie leaned over and whispered, "Nate, Nate." One of the names from the text logs I had shown her. Turns out he'd volunteered. He testified that he and Kelsey had been involved for over a year while we were engaged. Said she told him I was just a roommate, that the engagement was a mistake she couldn't get out of. The courtroom was silent. Even Kelsey looked stunned. And then came the moment that broke her. Her own messages. Melanie read them out loud. One from 2 weeks before the wedding. "I can't wait to see you again. After the wedding, I'll be freer. He's so gullible." Another. "Don't worry. This marriage is for appearances. You're the one I actually want." She had nothing left to say. No more tears. No more shifting blame. Just silence. When Kelsey took the stand, she looked like a completely different person. Gone was the sparkly, performative charm she used to wield like a weapon. She looked tired, drawn, like someone who had spent the night rehearsing but knew the lines wouldn't save her. Her lawyer started soft. Let her tell her version of the story. She spoke about how fast everything had moved, how she felt trapped and panicked. She said she never intended to hurt me and that Brad was just comfort during a confusing time. She kept using that word, confused. When Melanie stood up for cross-examination, she didn't raise her voice once. That's what made it so much worse. "Ms. Green," she said calmly, "were you confused when you booked a hotel with Brad 3 weeks before the wedding?" Kelsey hesitated. "It was a mistake. I was having doubts." Melanie nodded. "And were you confused when you texted Nate that your engagement was just for appearances?" Kelsey shifted in her seat. "That was taken out of context." Melanie smiled, just slightly. "Context? Let's provide some then." She held up a printed page, a full conversation with Brad just 5 days before the wedding. "I'll fake the smile for the ceremony. You know I'll be thinking of you the whole time." "Kelsey." Melanie paused. "Is that also out of context?" Kelsey's eyes darted around the room. "I don't remember writing that." "You don't remember?" "No." Melanie leaned in just a little. Do you remember telling your husband on your wedding day that he made you feel safe for the first time in your life? That one hit. Kelsey's jaw tightened. Her hands clenched in her lap. I thought I meant it, she muttered. Melanie let the silence sit. You thought you meant it. The judge scribbled something down. Then came the final strike. Melanie pulled out the prenup, walked over to Kelsey, placed it in front of her. This is your signature. Yes? Kelsey nodded, quietly. And this clause, fidelity from both parties, with penalties outlined in the event of infidelity. This was reviewed by your family's attorney before you signed, correct? Yes. And yet, on the day of your wedding, you committed infidelity. Within hours. No answer. The courtroom was dead silent. No movement. Even the bailiff looked uncomfortable. Then Melanie said, no further questions, Your Honor. Kelsey looked like a statue. Pale, rigid, unraveling in real time. You could feel the entire courtroom turning on her. All the sympathy she tried to build during her testimony had collapsed under the weight of her own words. That day ended with Melanie requesting permission to introduce final statements and a financial breakdown of the damages I was seeking. The judge nodded slowly. You may proceed. I've heard enough to consider penalties. The evidence speaks volumes. And just like that, the war was almost over. By the final day in court, the energy had shifted. Kelsey no longer made eye contact with anyone. Her parents sat stiffly behind her, drained and silent. Her lawyer looked like a man who knew he was trying to bail water out of a sinking ship using a teaspoon. And me? For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Melanie opened with closing remarks that weren't flashy, just devastating in their precision. She reminded the court of every single detail. The wedding day infidelity, the long-term deception with multiple partners, the financial misconduct, using joint funds to cover up affairs, the violation of a legally binding fidelity clause in the prenup, the emotional harm and public humiliation. But it wasn't just about what she did. It was how calculated it was. How easily she smiled through her vows knowing what she had already planned to do that same day. She entered a legal and emotional agreement under false pretenses, Melanie said. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a long-running campaign of deception. Kelsey's lawyer tried one last time to make it about emotions. He brought up her conflicted state, her family pressures, even tried blaming social media culture and wedding stress. He called for leniency and insisted she wasn't malicious, just confused and overwhelmed. But no one was buying it anymore, especially not the judge. She asked only one question before recessing to deliberate. To the defense, are you disputing the authenticity of any of the submitted messages or testimony? No, Your Honor. With that, the judge stood and left the room. We waited for 45 minutes. Kelsey didn't say a word. I think, at that point, she already knew how it would end. Her dad put a hand on her shoulder once. She brushed it off. Then the judge returned. Everyone stood. She read slowly and clearly, like each word mattered. In review of the evidence presented and the uncontested violations of the prenuptial agreement, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The marriage is hereby declared void under marital fraud statutes. Furthermore, the court awards financial restitution for emotional and reputational damages, totaling $48,200. I stared ahead. Kelsey's head dropped. The judge continued. Ms. Green is ordered to cover court costs and shall forfeit any claim to shared property or wedding gifts. Any contested items shall be returned to the original owner or donor within 30 days. And then, like that, it was over. The gavel came down, and so did the weight on my chest. The judge didn't need long. The marriage was declared null. The prenuptial agreement, upheld. She was found in violation of the fidelity clause. I was awarded financial compensation for emotional damages, court costs on her. She lost all claim to property, gifts, and anything tied to her wedding. Her lawyer didn't argue. The evidence was overwhelming. Kelsey didn't speak, didn't look at me. She just stood up and left the courtroom the moment the verdict was read. I didn't say a word either. I didn't need to. After everything, the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, the truth won. And not just in whispers or private conversations. In court, on record, that day, I didn't just walk out as a man who survived it. I walked out free.